Hello, I'm glad to see you again today. There's been so much going on lately, and working in my journal and book has been especially helpful as I contemplate these things and process and figure out my response and my responsibility to the injustice that we see every day. So I don't know if it's been helpful to you to have a place to kind of write and kind of work on things with your hands while you're thinking, but I encourage you to do that when you're struggling to process things. So as I said, I've been working on several things this week in my book that I would like to share with you. I added to some of my painted pages. This was the charcoal that I did of the branches a while ago. I added some pastel leaves and some watercolor flowers. I also added more to my quote page from last time. I added bits of color and some torn papers to make a flower and some texture in here. I added some watercolors over my wax pastel letter flowers. I also added to some of those flaps that we worked on last time. Some notes to myself underneath and just some different things around the outsides of my flaps. I added more to this page of flaps as well, more writing and just some texture kind of all over the page, even over the flaps too. Today we will need our books. We will need paints, either craft paint or watercolors or both if you have them. We'll need some paintbrushes or sponges. We will need writing implements, markers, pencils, pastels, scissors. And last video I asked that you would find some different things around your house that have texture. And so whatever you found, you can go get or go around now and find some things. I have a few different rubber placemats that I cut up. I have a piece of material, a piece of lace. I have this little sponge. I've got some little things that I found around the house, some cardboard, foam, and bubble wrap, one of my personal favorites. So take a moment, grab your stuff, and we'll get started. We're going to work with different kinds of texture today, and I'm going to do some with my watercolors, some with the acrylics, because they do act differently when you're using them. So the first way we're going to talk about is directly putting paint on something and then putting it right on the page. So here I have just a plain old paper napkin and two different kinds of sponges. So just by using these to apply the paint, it'll add texture. I'm going to dampen my sponge and tap in some of this watercolor. And then as I tap on my page, you can see it has a slightly watery look. But instead of seeing brush strokes, you see it's a little bit less uniform. So this is actually a bath sponge that I picked up for $1. This is a small C sponge and it has smaller pores. This one has bigger holes and this has smaller holes, so they do make a slightly different look. So I'm going to tap that right in the paint and add a couple. And with watercolors, the sponge has to be slightly wet, of course, because you have to make sure the paint is wet. If it's more wet, it'll be looser and less textured, and the drier it is, the more texture it gets. So those are using these two sponges with the watercolor. Now I'm just going to use a little bit of this napkin in the watercolor. So I'm tapping it. I slightly dampened my pads, and now I'm going to tap it on my book. And that's a nice dark look. There we go. And you can kind of see has some little wrinkles in there. I don't know how visible that is. Next, we're going to use the same 3 things, but we're going to use a little bit of the acrylic paint. So I'm taking a different side of my sponge, and this side is dry. So I'm just gonna tap in a little bit of the color here and tap it on my page. You can see that again, it's a similar texture to using the watercolor, but slightly more opaque. I'm gonna add a little bit of the yellow too, so you can see how it looks when you add multiple colors. And let's try that with the sea sponge now. And again, you can see it has a slightly different look than the watercolors. All right, for this one, I'm going to set it on the paper and then tap over it. I like using a sponge for this, but you can also use a brush. And when you're filling in spots, you could use marker and pencil as well. This is almost like using a stencil. Even though I like using a sponge, it's not getting to all the corners like if I was using a brush, but we're just going to see what this looks like so you can get the idea. So it kind of has some little square looking things. If I used a brush, I could reach those corners a little better. And while we're using this, I'm gonna go ahead and cover it with some paint. Just tapping paint on the actual plastic. And then I'm gonna flip it over and put it right back on the paper. And this kind of gives the opposite of what we just did on the other page. And try to press evenly and get it all on there. When I lift it up, it leaves the almost flower-like print, which actually is my favorite way to use this. I really like how it looks having these things. So again, for this one, we'll do the same thing. I'll use a different color paint so we can see a little bit better. There we go. And you can see some areas the paint was a little thicker and some it was on a little less thick. And now I'm going to use that same thing that I just did. I'll add a little bit more paint, just kind of swipe it on the top, and then I'm going to lay it flat and press down. And again, this will leave a different imprint than the other. So you can see the difference, and they're both neat. While I'm here, I might as well add a little bit more to this side. I have some more paint on here. There we go. And I'm a mess. If you have wax paper or some type of parchment paper, you can use strips of this to put between your pages so that the paint won't stick together. Ideally, it's best to let it dry before you flip. But I'm just gonna put that in there and flip the page. Now let's do some of these other textures. I'll stick with my sponge because that's what I've been using. I'm just gonna wipe that paint on my bubble wrap. And then flip it over and press down. And I just really enjoy how that looks, especially layering with different colors and maybe doing something over top. It creates a bit of depth. So this was with the acrylics. I'm going to show you a little bit with the watercolor paint. And since my sponge is used up, I'll use the brush this time. So again, I'm just putting paint over the bubble side. I didn't mention that. Put it over the bubbly side of the bubble wrap. And flip it over and press. And so you can see the difference between the watercolor here and the acrylic there. This is another type of foam that I also enjoy working with. It came with something I got in the mail. Again, I'll show you some watercolor. The edge here and press it down. The acrylic. That looks pretty neat. Watercolor is the green, the blue on this side is the acrylic. And you can also use this flatter side. Let's see what that looks like. This is the acrylic. I'm gonna press down. And then some of that watercolor. There you go. So this is a thicker styrofoam. I will show you this with both the acrylic and with the watercolor. I'm just going to tap that paint on here. And then let's get some of this watercolor. So then you've got watercolor on this side, acrylic on this side. This is just a piece of corrugated cardboard. Let's do some more. Acrylic on this end. And watercolor. These stripes look maybe a little more similar. This material I'm going to set down on here and just tap over. I did some with acrylic and we'll do some with the watercolor. You can press it through like that, or you can flip it over and actually press the material on there, depending on what you're working with. I tend to like the imprints better than going through. Some of the cottons seem to work better than the polyesters. I'll do a little bit on this one. I believe this is a type of linen or a mix of linen and cotton. I'm not exactly sure. So I put some on there. It went through, you can see, but I'm just gonna press it. And I actually really like, has these really itsy bitsy tiny squares that you can see. I'll try it with a watercolor too. And again, that's pretty light, but it does leave a nice little imprint on there. There is one other thing I wanted to show you that I really enjoyed. Here I made a spray just using water and a gel food coloring. And that's another way you can get texture. That's especially what I love to do with lace. I have all this old lace from my grandmother, and it's just a fun way to incorporate some of the beautiful patterns in the art. So again, there's a video that shows you how to make this using water and food coloring gel. But all you do is lay your lace or fabric with holes down, and then you spray. And then when you lift it up, it leaves a really beautiful pattern. As you go, I want you to experiment both with what you've got, but with colors, different textures, and letting it dry in between, and then layering more texture on top. It's just really fun to see the layers of texture and color build. I wanted to show you about using marker and water if you don't happen to have any paints. So I've got some bubble wrap here, and I will use a pink marker, and I'm just gonna kind of color. And I think the bubble wrap keeps the marker on top, so you don't need to add water. You can just press it in there, and I think that'll work just fine. So that's using markers. Any of your plastics should be fine doing that, but if your marker feels a little bit drier, you may, you can color it, and then if you need to add a little bit of water to spread it out, just a tiny bit with your brush, you can do that to spread that color a little more. And then press it just like you would if you were using paint. So there you go. For this part of our exercise, we are going to brainstorm. So grab your pen, and I want you to just start writing 12 adjectives. And these are just descriptive words that have a positive connotation for you. All right, I've got my 12. And next, write 6 words that characterize who you are. For example, for me, it might be a woman, a sister, daughter. Just brainstorm 6 words that characterize who you are. Excellent. Let's find 3 pages that are in a row in our books that we can use. Here we go. These are the ones that I kind of decided I was going to use. And so I have a front and a back, and then I have 3 pages in the middle. So I want you to hold these middle 3 pages and grab your scissors. So we're going to do 2 cuts to split it into thirds. So we're holding these 3 pages together and just slicing them down to the binding. There we go. So if you need to kind of move them over to make sure they're all the way, you can do that. You can see we've got several different options now. But let's go ahead and starting with your 6 words that characterize you, we're going to write those in the bottom third of each section, the front and back of each. The next thing we're going to do is go through in those 12 descriptive words. The adjectives we're going to write on the upper 2 sets of flaps. No particular order, just kind of fill it in. Let's go through and check our options right now. Leafy, natural, human. Let's see, strong, beefy human, or a interesting, lovely woman. Vigorous, beefy life. Maybe a fresh, marvelous woman, or a vigorous, intriguing child, or an amazing, marvelous being. Wow. I'm thinking I feel pretty good right now. I'm an interesting, lovely being. When I was a kid, I had one of those puzzles where it had hair at the top and then eyes and nose in the middle and then mouth and chin at the bottom, and you could switch the pictures to create all these different kinds of people, and I've always loved that, and so this is just kind of a nod to that fun kind of process. So if you want, you can go back and do another one of these with face parts or animal parts or robot parts or whatever you think is fun and gets you going. Anyway, I hope you have fun with that. I'm so glad that you joined me again today. For next time, I would like you to add some more texture in your book using some of those same things we used today. Play around with colors and layers. Also, I would like you to collect some things that hold meaning for you. I've gathered a few bits and pieces of memorabilia, I guess, from a trip. I have a receipt from my baggage plane ride, a ticket stub, a couple food wrappers, a hostel card from one of the places that I stayed, an old napkin that I took with me. Think of something you did that has good memories or that make you smile and remind you of a special time, and gather those things and put them with your book for the next video. As always, keep adding to your book. Thanks again and have a special day. Until next time.